You're listening to No Plot, Only Lore, a podcast about games and the tables we play them at. Your DMs tonight and every night are Josh and Chris. You can find us on all podcast platforms or check us out at noplotonlylore.com. If you like what you hear today, please rate and review the show and share it with everyone you've ever met. Welcome back to No Plot, Only Lore, Faerun's favorite 55 minutes of fantasy follies. We are talking about...
Oh, no.
What?
That was alliterations. You're setting up standards.
No.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that up.
I just think of something that rhymes with Underdark, and you'll be okay. So this week I was inspired by an article that was force-fed to me by the internet about... Mm-hmm. So the inspiration came from an article that literally just said, this is why Star Wars sucks. Which initially I was in support of, but their assertion was that the reason Star Wars sucks is not because the Jedi are boring, it's because the Sith are. And that
I want to make it a little bit clearer
that
like the article itself was not very good.
No, it was. I agreed.
It's a real good headline, though.
Yeah, I agreed with their assertion, but they did not do a good job of backing it up. And maybe that's because they were just forced to like crap out this sort of, it wasn't clickbaity, but it was, a very hastily constructed article about their frustrations with the new Star Wars shows, et cetera, et cetera. But in examining mentally like what made the Sith as we see them in current content kind of vanilla and plain and boring, we got on the idea of what makes a good villain. Villains are...
Okay, so I kind of want to...
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold up. I kind of want to, like, get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, like, I generally dislike the Sith.
Okay.
And it is not a new thing for me. Like...
When you say...
Original trilogy...
Yeah, sorry. I want to get some clarification. When you say you dislike the Sith, like, which Sith are you referring to?
Well, that's kind of part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the idea of Dark Force users is not new.
No.
Right? Like, obviously, from the very beginning of the first movie of the trilogy, we have Darth Vader.
Right.
But the idea of the Sith wasn't developed in those movies.
No.
It only really started to come out in the prequel trilogy.
Sure.
Well, and before that, the expanded universe, like there was a whole world for that. But like the idea of the Sith correlates to a lot of the problems that I have with Jedi as well. Mm-hmm. Where it's just like we've got two groups of monks who are disagreeing about their magic psychic powers as to which of them is doing more harm.
Right.
And it's just like really boring all across.
Okay. So let me come back at that for a second here. So first of all,
sure.
I'd like to establish that I am someone who embraces the EU and like most ancillary Star Wars content as like legitimately part of the canon.
Okay.
I think the ideas... I'm not a Lucasfilm purist by any stretch of the imagination. I think some of the best development of ideas in the Star Wars universe and some of the best character developments have come from better writers than George and friends. And I think that's backed up by what we're seeing now with like Thrawn being such a part of the new stuff as he was in Rebels, and like going back to ideas that were developed in the EU by just better writers. To that end, I think the Sith as a whole were actually fleshed out in a really interesting and satisfying way in the Old Republic. And by the Old Republic, I specifically mean the Star Wars MMO that you forgot still exists.
Absolute best trailer for any game that's ever happened.
Oh, unreal good trailer. Yeah, 100%.
Like the one where they like crash that ship and they just like light up a small sea of red lightsabers.
Yeah.
Just mwah.
Yeah.
Best Star Wars movie that had come out in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So
it's so good.
And I know that like excuse me, part of the reason that they had to develop some of this stuff was simply by weight of like, you can't only have 2 villains in the entire MMO. Like, I get that. Right. But the idea that they expanded on like the Sith being not just like a ideology, but like an actual race, and having a Sith homeworld, and expanding on what it meant to be a quote-unquote dark side follower of the Force, really fleshed out like proper motivations for large groups of quote-unquote bad guys. Were they doing bad things? Yes. But they really explored like what was an actual motivation for someone who doesn't just want to be cartoonishly evil. And so, yeah, like,
so I think
they've been done a disservice by the strict adherence in the like canon movies and shows to the rule of 2 and like the effects of Darth Bane and some of these other people on like how Sith culture operates. But I don't think the Sith themselves are to blame for that. I think that's like kind of Lucasfilm's blinders that they put on their own material.
I guess. I mean, like, I can see some potential in that for sure. I did not play the MMO. I generally don't play a lot of MMOs. Like, I'm not really drawn to those, but like I knew that there was some stuff both in the Knights of the Old Republic games that was interesting about the Sith. I think like part of what I find so frustrating about them is the cyclical sameness that happens across Star Wars. So the fact that like it doesn't matter what era of Jedi you're looking at, they're always wearing something that looks a little bit like Ben Kenobi's robes.
Yeah.
Or like the fact that you don't really need to factor in what era you're looking at to know that the guy with the black and red color scheme is probably a Sith.
Right.
Right. And then like the Sith come out and they do a bunch of badness, and then the light side wins, and then there's like 1,000 years of peace and prosperity, and then the Sith come back and they do some badness, right? Like it's just like there's this very boring, like deeply boring cyclical nature to the long history. Like I don't think we really grasp how long 10,000 years is.
Oh yeah, no, we have no concept for that.
Nobody should be wearing anything that looks even close to what they're wearing between those 2 eras.
No.
Like, unless it's ironic. Unless somebody has decided that togas are back.
Oh, like, this is like when in iRobot Will Smith wears, like, what was it? Converse, because he's, like, a student of old school.
Or, like, every thing that references 20th century culture in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I love listening to classical music, and it's the fucking Beastie Boys. Like, the anachronisms aside, it's just like the fact that they keep dipping into the same well, and neither of the 2 forces is really developing or changing in any appreciable way.
Sure.
Is something that I find very difficult to reconcile. So, like, if you are a student of history, becoming part of the Sith makes no sense.
Right. Well, I would say, like, the prequel trilogies, like them or not, they did do some of the best work to show the, like, true insidiousness of the Sith. Like, the entire Palpatine Chancellor subplot is really, like, getting at the core of, like, this is what the Sith are. They're not just, like, 2 over-the-top cartoon villains. Like, they are going to infiltrate effective areas and, you know, disguise their true intentions, and, leverage their abilities into positions of power to manipulate, and not just like, by the way, me and my best friend with a red laser sword are coming in to just, murder children. Like, the fact that they twisted someone else to murder all their children for them is, like, really how they work, and what makes them intelligent, potent, worthy adversaries for the Jedi, even with only 2 of them operating, right? It's not just...
And you've just hit on a bunch of our points.
Well, yes.
What makes the good villains?
Yeah, and it just it gets lost in the sauce sometimes when people think it's just like about the Emperor sitting there and lightning fingersing Luke and being like, that's the Sith, and it's like, no, the Sith are actually Chancellor Palpatine. That's the Sith
doing a plan that is so convoluted that it doesn't translate well to a plot.
Exactly.
Like getting involved with trade federations and like embargoes, and stuff that is honestly kind of boring, than using that to like leverage his way to become the emperor of a previous republic. Like, I get all of that, and like I'm not a prequel trilogy hater. I did not enjoy them particularly, but I did see their value. I did watch all of them in theaters. I didn't think they were great movies, but I did like them.
I am an episode 1 hater because there's so many dumb choices made in that movie. But I think the prequel trilogies do establish like the whole Skywalker saga and the importance of it in an interesting way. But that being said,
also,
there are...
shout out to Hayden Christensen,
as
well, like coming back for like some of the Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker stuff lately. It's been nice to see him get some props.
Yeah, episode 3 Hayden and like post like the TV Hayden have shown that he really did understand the character of Anakin. But
more than George Lucas did.
Yes, absolutely. But what's interesting about the Star Wars stuff that we're talking about here is that it manages to also show us examples of bad villains and kind of useless villains. Not to crap on the guy too much, but the Darth Maul that we saw in episode 1 was not a good villain.
No.
Right? He was...
And there was some retconning that happened later that turned him into a good villain. But... And
I know the editing suite kind of did him dirty a little bit, but he was at best like a kind of interesting like opponent, He was one good fight in a black leotard.
I do wonder if that was the intended purpose for him. Right, like I always got the feeling that episode 1 Darth Maul wasn't a villain; he was a lieutenant. Right, like he was somebody that he was a mini boss. Yep, he was a guy that you had to fight to get to the actual boss, except that the actual boss was so far away and wrapped up in so many like onion layers that the connection between the two wasn't obvious.
Right. Well, okay, there were 2 problems. One, the marketing machine at Lucasfilm sold us on this is your awesome, cool looking main villain, and 2, the movie didn't do a good job of communicating that like Darth Maul didn't know he wasn't the main villain. Like, right. That's you kind of, you don't really get a chance to understand like that, like, because you're right. I think Palpatine did 100% just throw him to the wolves and use him as like a big red speed bump for the Jedi on his tail for a while, right? But he didn't know that's what was happening. But they didn't show that well.
Well, and I think that there is a good way to use that character that would have made him a compelling villain in the prequel trilogy. Yeah. And I think the way that I would have done that would be to set him up as a later rival for Anakin.
Gotcha.
Somebody that he had met multiple times, somebody that kept getting away, somebody that he just could not like grab and hold on to. He was just slippery, and he kept like slipping into the city or whatever, and Anakin was just like getting more and more frustrated with the guy. Right? Build him up. Spend a couple of movies building him up to be Anakin's rival, and then have him fucking murk him at the end.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing too, is that you see more of the potential of the character through Rebels and the other Star Wars animated stuff, but again, like, they don't give you the chance to like, I hate that so much good character work and development gets done in products that people can like sort of mentally discard before they've actually checked them out. And they put this like huge barrier of entry in the way where it's like, oh, you want to see what's like actually going on in Star Wars? You better watch 4 seasons of this animated show that starts off kind of rough.
I tried to watch Ahsoka, and I had no idea what the hell was going on.
Well, and I watched Ahsoka without having watched Rebels, and I was like, this is kind of mid. And people say it gets slightly improved by like understanding the relationships between the characters more, but like, I shouldn't have to do homework to understand your show.
No.
Like, straight up. Season 3 of a show, I can understand that you build on the previous seasons. But season 1 should not be like, boy, I hoped you watched 6 seasons of this other ancillary content, and you better be concurrently watching The Bad Batch or whatever.
Except that Ahsoka is like, it was never marketed as such, but I've heard it referred to as, like, the Rebels finale season.
Yeah, and it kind of seems to be. Who knows what's going to happen with, like, season 2, but I don't know, man. Like, I'm not digging that.
Let's talk about villains.
But let's. So
every time we get in Star Wars, it ends up being like a 20-minute conversation that like skirts around the thing that we're trying to talk about, but doesn't actually like get to the meat of it.
Yeah. So Star Wars has good villains. You have to dig for them. What makes a good villain?
You don't really need to dig for the good villains. Like Darth Vader, right off the bat.
Yes.
Solid villain.
Yes.
Right? Like, he has, from his introduction, right? Like, the very first time you see the guy, he's incredibly physically imposing. He's got authority. You know what he's about. He's got a connection to the rest of the cast. Like, you don't necessarily know what that is going to be. I don't think him and Han Solo have anything between them at all. But, like, between him and Leia and Luke, already from the hop, you've got really clear relationships established. No, I think that like you don't have to dig far to find the good villains in Star Wars, as long as you're focusing on episodes 4 through 6.
Right. Yeah, I agree with the assertion there. So like let's then like talk about why we think those villains are good. So you already touched on the idea of the connection, the personal connection.
Right.
Right off the hop. Like, you know what? I'm just going to keep referring back to specifically Star Wars as we go through our examples, because I think it helps to ground it. But you talked about the connection. Right off the bat, you know that Darth Vader has been pursuing Leia and the Rebels. Like, they have a history. This isn't just like, oh, I found you, and I'm just going to run after. Like, they've been hounding them, right?
And like for a while.
Yeah.
Like you have the immediate sense that this is like a shared history that lasts years. Like Darth Vader didn't just like wake up a few days ago and decide that he was going to hunt down Leia Organa. This is something where they've been playing cat and mouse games for quite some time.
Yeah.
And Vader is gloating about it.
Yeah.
Right? Like he is obviously very pleased with himself, and like Leia is very rebellious. And like they have that established history
and
right off the bat.
They have a clear like rapport and dynamic, right? Like when they confront each other initially, it's not like, hey, who are you? You disobeyed me or whatever. It's like, oh, hey, we've been going at this back and forth. There's a certain level of like sarcasm and cattiness, and he's like 100% done with her bullshit, which like totally understandable. That's a familiarity. Yeah. Right?
Like you can tell that these two have not always necessarily been antagonistic to one another. There have been some awkward state dinners.
Right.
Like that they have had to interact outside of this type of interaction, right? They've had to interact outside of this context.
Yeah.
So that they have that history and they have that cattiness and they're able to go at each other. There's a familiarity and a comfort with the communication between the two of them.
Yeah.
And then, like, they're also related, which, I mean, I don't hate the idea of your villain being related to your protagonist, but it is played out.
Right. But, like, in their defense, it wasn't played out when they did it.
No.
And they did the correct thing of, like, don't reveal it immediately. Like,
I mean, they kind of buried the lead with the whole, like, kissing your sister thing. But,
right.
Like, I think some of that can be forgiven based on the nature of, like, serial fiction publication.
Well, and you know what? I think part of that is just, like, studio notes or whatever. Like, I don't think they were planning on 3 movies, so it's like, let's get all the elements in we can in the first movie and then tease that out later, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
But no, I think that, like, a good villain does need to have some sort of personal connection to your protagonist. And, like, it doesn't have to be a big complex backstory or anything. Like, you don't need to have some sort of convoluted nonsense going on. My current villain in the game that I'm running is a Rakshasa who has been masquerading as a professor at the university.
Yeah.
And one of my player characters has recently stopped having a job at the university because they kicked him out.
Right.
Right, so they are academic rivals, and that was it to begin with, right? Like, that's the entirety of the personal connection that they had originally.
Right.
And since then, they've established a bigger personal connection between him and the other characters, mostly because he burned down their house. So, like, having some of that history.
Yeah, like, you know, you're saying relations are great, but, like, they don't have... First of all, they don't have to be, like, blood relations, but they don't have to be, like, super intimate either in some other realm. Like, they just have to be acquaintances, you know?
Yeah, they have to know each other a little bit, at least. Because, like, the stakes in any story, like, yes, you can set up, like, the big world-shattering stakes, but we've all seen what happens when you have a story where the stakes are like, we're going to save the world, but, like, nobody is actually personally invested in that thing.
Yeah.
Always falls flat.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the emotional notes just aren't there. So if you want to hit those emotional notes, you need to have some sort of personal relationship that you can play off of.
Well, the thing is, like, no, your characters are not all Superman. They don't just have, like, this, you know, altruistic vein through their bodies that consumes their every waking thought of, like, I must be the sole protector of humanity. Like, players can have very small, petty motivations, and small,
and often will.
Yeah, and small, petty rivalries with a villain are, like, a great way to build that. You know, it can start with something simple and build over time.
Well, I mean, your character in our 4E campaign was tied to, like, one of the bigger lieutenants through a previous injury that was done to him off screen.
Right.
Like, dude cut off your character's hand.
Yeah.
And wore it like a trophy.
Yeah.
And that provided, again, those personal stakes of, like, I'm going to get my hand back.
Yeah.
And his personal stakes of, I'm going to fuck with this guy that I've been fucking with for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. Not super deep.
No.
But they're there.
No. And I think people forget, like, sort of the impact of, like, casual, forgetful cruelty on things. Like, you can have a villain that's... Well, sorry. You can have a villain that's really important to your characters who, like, actually doesn't really remember you guys and doesn't really care about you, right?
What's that quote from Street Fighter?
Yeah, it's for you, it was like the day that M. Bison visited my village, and for me, it was a Tuesday. Like...
Yeah, just like he doesn't remember you. But you clearly remember him. Like, he had a huge impact on your life. He is a driving force and a motivator in your life.
Yeah. And
this guy has killed many people who look a little bit like you, and you could be related to any number of them.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The relationship that you're talking about, it can be one way, essentially. Like,
yeah.
Well, the other example is like
better when it is.
Yeah, and like the Princess Bride is another example where it's like he's hunting down this guy with a very distinct feature of 6 fingers, and the guy just like not remember him because that was just like some brat whose dad he murdered and he didn't think about ever again.
And he's killed so many dads with so many brats that it could be any one of them, and a bunch of them have already come to him to seeking revenge, and he's already stabbed them. Very one-sided is fine as long as there is some sort of personal connection. I think the next big thing that I usually look for is like the inner morality of the character, not necessarily like the ethics of the character, because like I think we're starting to fall into a bit of a rut with some villains. And I blame Killmonger from Black Panther.
Yeah.
Of he's got a point, but his methods are wrong.
Yeah.
All of your villains should have a point.
Yeah. Yeah, if your villain doesn't have a point, why do they exist?
Yeah, and they should have a good point, right? Like it should be a point that you can justify in your head. Yeah. So, like, Killmonger does have that relationship aspect because he is, like, family to T'Challa.
Yeah.
And they establish that right away. But then, like, his morals are where he differs from the other people in the story. And I think that, like, the urge is to make somebody who has an ethical point to make,
right,
and just like an unethical way of pursuing it,
right.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It can be an unethical thing as long as just the character, the villain, believes in that thing,
right. And that's the key point. Is like, don't think that like every villain has to be like secretly in the right. They just went about it the wrong way. You can have like off their rockers, Looney Tunes characters who are doing comically evil things because they think they're funny, but they believe in what they're doing, right? Like, I guess like the easy, lazy example of that is like, the Joker from the Dark Knight trilogy. Like, right. He's doing over the top evil things. He's justified them in his own mind, and sometimes it's just because they're funny to him, right? Like.
Well, and he's an interesting case, too, because, like, his justifications... And, like, I love that there are so many versions of the Joker that you can pull from.
Yeah.
But my favorite morality for the Joker is that he is a balance to Batman.
Right.
He's the chaos to Batman's imposed order.
Right.
And so the things that he's doing, he recognizes that they are wrong. He recognizes that they are evil.
Right.
But they are evil in balance to this other force that he sees as being unbalancing for the world.
Right. Right.
Right. And so it isn't necessarily like an ethical thing, because again, like ethics would say maybe don't poison the water hole or kill a bunch of people in a parade. But the moral thing is to create that balance.
Yeah.
Which that I think makes those versions of the Joker, the versions of the Joker that are working towards a goal of that type, the most compelling.
Yeah.
The ones that are just doing chaos for chaos's sake, like the Jared Leto
Jokers,
far less compelling, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%. Like there's and I think, obviously like the impact on pulp culture has shown like you can't just have a Joker who's just out there like to just dick with people for no reason. Like he needs to have a motivation that resonates with people.
Unless you're able to get Cesar Romero back.
Unless you can reanimate Cesar Romero. But
Did I ever tell you about my favorite idea for a new Batman series?
No.
Okay, so this is about 10 years ago, so keep in mind that we're thinking about actors from 10 years ago.
Okay.
I wanted Nathan Fillion to play Batman.
Okay.
I wanted Michael Cera to play Robin.
Why?
Because I wanted them to be playing their 1960s versions of their characters.
Okay.
Where all of the villains are incredibly dark and serious.
Oh. So you want,
got like...
You want to put Adam West into the Dark Knight, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or Arkham Asylum. I want Adam West bounding around with like a big round bomb in Arkham Asylum.
Okay.
I think that would be fucking brilliant.
I like the idea of them just like doing like the pantomime climb up the wall in like in just, you know, dead serious gritty Gotham.
Right? Yeah. Holy broken glass Batman in Michael Cera's voice. Like I can absolutely see that shit working so well. Unfortunately, I think that both Nathan and Michael are too old now.
That might actually make them better for the roles, to be honest.
That might actually... Oh, man. Just squeezing a 40-year-old Michael Cera into those tights.
See, this is...
I'm going to get...
Yeah.
I'm going to get their agents on the phone.
Oh, I didn't know we had that pull. Okay. Actually, there's a guy I think would make a great like version of that now as Robin, and it's comedian Johnny Pemberton. Look him up, and you will understand the angle I'm going for with it.
All right. James Acaster was kind of the first one that popped into my head.
I think he's also too straight-laced on it.
A little bit. He's a little too deadpan.
Yeah. I want him to be a little more straight-up comical.
Yeah. Yeah, I want both of them to be straight-up comical, and then, like, the villains to just be, like, straight-up fucking murdering people.
Yeah.
And then I still want, like, the big, like, visible sound effects, right? Like the pows and the whaps.
Yeah.
During all the fight scenes. This idea has been in my head for too long. Hollywood, fucking call me.
Yeah.
All right, villains, though.
Villains,
Yeah. I think one of the big things that we miss on villains sometimes, especially for role-playing games, is that they have to be a worthy challenge.
Yes.
Because, like, I think it's a little too easy to build a balanced encounter for everything but 5th edition, where your villain is going to fall prey to any kind of focused fire and just fucking die.
Okay.
Right? Like, you build your, like, small villain up, right? Like, you build up an encounter with the villain where the villain is supposed to escape, and suddenly they're taking, like, 3 firebolts to the face, and they're dead.
Okay.
They do need to be a little more powerful than your player characters.
Yeah.
Not so much that you're like... You don't want to bring a level 20 to a level 3 game. Right? Or maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, here's how I feel. Like, they can be, like, cartoonishly overpowered at certain points. Like, I truly do believe in doing that for, like, plot purposes, you know? Like...
Right.
Whether it's just like humbling a party that's gotten a little too big for their britches as things go along, or just establishing like how much work it's going to take to finally overtake this guy, right? Like I'm fine with bringing in this like turbo destruction guy right off the hop, just so they know like this isn't like some local fuck around and find out guy. This is the real deal.
I think for me, the thing that I always try to fall back on is less overpowered and more overprepared. Like, I think one of the best things about Strahd in the Ravenloft games is that his entire dungeon is built around maximizing his ability set and minimizing that of the players.
Right. It's his home.
Yeah.
You know?
It's where he fucking lives.
Yeah.
You came here.
Yeah.
You get to deal with the fact that, I've got some air vents so I can turn into a bat and fly up to my bedroom because it's easier if I don't feel like saying goodbye to my party. Right? Like if I want to do an Irish exit, gone.
Yep. Well, it's just like if you come into my house and you realize that like every door frame is a foot taller than normal and all the countertops are actually at like nipple height for you, like maybe this environment was built for someone who's different.
Yeah. And I think that like the reason that Strahd ends up being such a memorable character is because he's utilizing those strengths in interesting ways. Without necessarily being overpowered, right? Like, he's got escape routes that are built into the thing. He's got contingency plans upon contingency plans for all of the various encounters. Can you murk him in the first encounter where you meet him? Maybe.
Yeah, if you get really lucky.
You'd have to be really lucky.
But that's the other thing that's you kind of alluded to there, though, is that, like, he's the villain, but he's got escape routes. Like, he is fallible.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that an immortal vampire lord needs, like, a back door because, maybe your guys just brought really good wooden stakes,
Or even just, like, you have, like, a few characters rolling 20s and rolling all the time.
Yeah.
Well, then, like, occasionally he's going to need to peace out.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, a character like Strahd is smart enough to know that, yes, he is a vampire. Yes, he is relatively powerful. But there are people who know his weaknesses, and they are coming for him.
Right. And he's made enemies. There are people who have an active interest in him failing. So, if he just catches a whiff of garlic bread on the wind, like, he's out of there.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about Strahd is that the difficulty of his encounters scales with the adventure.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think it was the 4th edition version of Ravenloft where they very explicitly laid out that when you get to his roof, if you are on his roof, the first thing he is going to do is grapple your cleric, fly off the roof, and drop him.
Yeah.
Just get him out of the fucking fight.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, like, each of the challenges where you meet him, like, the first one, he can turn into a bat. Right? And he's gonna use bat abilities to, like, fly up in the rafters and, like, shoot at you from a distance.
Yeah.
Next time, he's going to turn into mist. He's going to be impossible to hit without magical weapons.
Right.
Right? And so, like, each of these phases of the encounters that you're having with him, he's increasing the logistical difficulty of tangling with him.
Sure.
And I think that for, like, long-term campaigns, this can just be as simple as, like, having your villains level up at the same time your characters do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, have new and interesting abilities pop up when your characters interact with those people again in the future.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite villains. Did you ever watch Wakfu?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's a French anime-esque cartoon.
Okay.
That's all animated in Flash and better than it has any right to be.
Right.
Like the first season. The second season and on, I wasn't really attached to. But the first season was really, really good.
Yeah.
And they had a villain who was like a clockwork person who could control time.
Yeah.
And so, like, the first ability that he had was that he just like froze everything in time, and he was able to move when everybody else wasn't.
Okay.
Stole that ability for a character in one of my games.
Oh, okay.
Later on, that character was actually able to, like, rewind parts of time to be able to do things over again when they screwed up.
Yeah. Stole
that ability for the same thing. Right? Just, like, the next time they met that character, she had cooler powers.
Yeah.
Right? And they were still related, but now she was able to do something that was, like, internally consistent
with
what she was doing, but also more and a little bit surprising. And now we've got this to deal with.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to sidebar for 1 second to point out I recently saw the new Strahd campaign kit that's been put out. Okay. It's been published inside of a coffin, which I think is very funny. Mm. But the over-the-top theater kit aspect of it is we open it all up, and they've given you a dozen custom postcards to send out to your friends to invite them to the campaign.
That's adorable.
It's I as the Count Strahd invites you to whatever. It's so funny.
Okay. For somebody who doesn't like How to Host a Murder type games,
yeah,
that's very How to Host a Murder.
Yeah, it's great. I don't like the price point that they're putting this together at, because it's really here's a book and a DM screen and some postcards for $140. But if they put more goofy, immersive stuff like that in those adventures, I'm far, far more likely to buy them. I want you to be as campy as possible.
And then you just get a D&D branded coffin to put stuff in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's adorable.
It's great.
I don't know if I would ever use it.
I am considering floating the idea past our current group for the next campaign. Once we're done.
Don't even tell them. Just show up with the postcards in envelopes, wax sealed, and just hand them out to your players.
And Keith. That'd be very funny. Just cuck my own DM.
All right. So, worthy opponents. They have to be intelligent. They have to be growing with your players, and they do have to be beatable. I think that's going back to the diehard principle of your players want to get the shit kicked out of them, but they also want to win. Having a credible threat that you're running with, and it doesn't have to be the same credible threat all the time.
Yeah,
right. If your characters have outgrown the villain that you have right now, it is okay to have them be working for another bigger villain.
Yeah.
Twice.
Yeah.
This was something that we talked about a little bit before the mics went hot.
Yeah.
We're just there's a limit to how often you can do that.
Yeah, and I think it's very much okay. My supposition was you get to do it once, and you said twice, and I'm okay, fine.
Okay.
I was going to fight you over one stupid twist. But I am a person who really does not like reusing twists in a campaign. But the way you laid it out was logical, right?
Right. So I laid it out as you have the lieutenant working at the bottom level, and once you finish with that, you realize that he's working for a general, and that general is working for a king.
Right.
Right. And so that's the progression that I laid out for that.
And I've, upon reflection, I think in the past I've done a similar progression, but the progression wasn't as direct, if that makes sense. So there was a underboss working for a mob boss, but then what the campaign realized was that this mob boss was really just sort of the head of a bunch of different cultic cells devoted to the same thing. Okay. It didn't have really centralized leadership except for their ultimate god, right? So it's there's a connection, but they weren't, X reports to Y reports to Z.
Right. And I don't think it necessarily has to be reports.
Right.
Just if you have somebody who has been working with somebody.
Yeah.
and it turns out that that somebody is significantly more powerful and has maybe even played them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they are using them towards their own goals.
Like Darth Maul,
without their knowledge. Darth Maul. Oh.
Yeah.
Got his legs cut off, and then he went and got robot legs. Spoiler alert for Star Wars from 20 years ago.
Yeah, this is your fault. You should know this by now.
Yeah. But yeah, like, working with somebody who is using you for your own aim. So maybe not even like Darth Maul. What I would look at would be like the incredibly insensitive Chinese stereotypes that were running the Merchants Guild.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
the Trade Federation.
The Trade Federation, that's it. Like, they weren't working for Palpatine.
Right.
They were working with Palpatine, but they were obviously just mooks. Right? Like, they didn't know nothing from nothing about, like, the bigger plans, but they had goals that aligned. And so, like, they were a little bit the villains of the first movie.
Well, they were cooperating with Sidious, and then only later did they realize, oh, no, there's, like, more going on here. Like, that line, like, oh, now there are two of them. Like, yeah, they did not they thought they were the main villain and didn't realize who was actually pulling the strings.
So that is a way that you can do that progression without having to do, like, the general to the king progression. You just do the, like, these guys were doing a thing, and then we realized that, like, they actually didn't know as much as they thought they did. And the actual problem is this shit over here.
Okay, I just had a thought. How do you feel about establishing from, like, level 1 that your main villain is actual Satan? And then, like, that is their, like, far in the distance goal. And then you set other, like, lower level, more beatable obstacles in their way towards that.
That's my campaign right now.
Okay.
We started at level 3, so we didn't start at level 1. But mostly because, like, my player characters kept dying.
Yeah, level 1 sucks. Let's just say that right now.
Yeah, level 1 is terrible.
Like, 5th edition level 1 is actually awful. 4th edition level 1 was playable. 5th edition level 1 is, like, every meme about a wizard dying to 1d4 embarrassment damage. Like, that is actually every character.
Yeah, except it's, like, 1d10 embarrassment damage takes down your fighter.
Yeah.
It's not good. So yeah, we started at level 3 and established pretty early on that the dingus that they went and found in the first session is a shard of a demon lord that has been conjoined with another holy being to create, like, a god situation.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know how much you know about, like, Eberron lore, but the Silver Flame is actually, like, a demon lord and a human paladin and a quaddle that have been speared together to create one new deity.
Like some sort of unholy shish kebab?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the dingus that they found was, like, a crystallized part of the original Demon Lord's fire. Okay. And that's what they're trying to get off the planet to drop in a volcano on Kryn.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's absolutely the stakes that I set up right away. We've got Demon Lords, we've got, like, literal gods that we're dealing with. We haven't actually interacted with any of them yet, but the first, like, major lieutenant that they're dealing with is a Rakshasa that's trying to bring that Demon Lord back.
Okay, yeah. So it's like day 1, Orcus is the bad guy. Day 2, now we got to deal with these guys who really love Orcus.
They really like him, and nobody's entirely sure why.
Yeah.
Because he's not nice to them.
No.
Orcus is, like, famously a dick.
He is a jerk.
No, and like, getting to that, I guess, a little bit is, like, the backstory for your villains.
Yeah. So, like, obviously, like, some of the biggest bads are just, like, jerks kind of for no reason, but that only works when, like, you're talking about, like, sort of the outlandish ideals on either end of the spectrum, and then when you talk about like actual things in your campaign, like it's one thing to have like Bahamut and Vecna as like two perfectly opposed deities on opposite ends of the spectrum, but you need like actual things to care about.
That's one of my big problems with the Baldur's Gate 3 plot is like the involvement of Mystra and Elminster and the gods of death.
Yeah.
Is so black and white in a lot of ways that it's almost cartoonish.
Yeah. I mean, and this is coming as a guy who like runs Saturday morning cartoon campaigns. Like, that's a little over the top.
A little bit. And like, there are some cool backstory elements that are happening there. Unfortunately for Baldur's Gate 3, it doesn't really have a lot of like depth to the villain backstories right away. I don't want to spoil anything for like Act 2 or 3.
I have no idea what's going on.
Okay. I'm just not going to say anything because there could be somebody who hasn't played the game yet. But going back to Star Wars, because Star Wars is easy to relate to.
Yeah.
Darth Vader, despite the fact that I think the backstory for Darth Vader was a little ham-handed in its execution, he's got a backstory.
It's true.
And it's an interesting one.
It's true.
Right? Dude was a slave, which the incredibly ham-handed handling of slavery is hilarious and bad.
Mostly bad.
Mostly very bad. But he was born a slave.
Yeah.
He was an incredible pilot from the get-go.
Yep.
He was whisked away by Jedi, leaving his mother in slavery because I guess the Jedi didn't have enough money to also buy her. Then raised through the Jedi ranks and met a woman, fell in love. Love things happened, and then that love was threatened, and his reaction to that was what drove him to seek knowledge that was outside the norm for what he was dealing with. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's a little convoluted. It isn't handled very well, but like the beats of that story make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they're classic beats.
They are. Yeah. There's never a time where you're like, I wonder what Anakin's motivations are.
Yeah, they're pretty clear.
He doesn't like sand.
It's coarse and it gets everything. Anyways.
One of the things that I like to do with villain backstories is I'll make them like a mirror of my heroes' backstories.
Okay.
And you can see this in media all over the place, where it's just like the main bad guy's story is like there, but by the grace of God go I.
Yeah.
Right? Like all of the beats are kind of the same.
Yeah.
And it is only a couple of the people around them and a couple of the reactions that they had personally that changed and diverged this story from one of us as a hero and one of us as a villain.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like to do it all the time because like it feels a little cheap if you do it more than like a few times per game.
Yeah.
But if you can like get some of your characters' backstories and then build off of those in interesting ways to make characters like villains that are going to be sympathetic for those characters, it's a really good way to get an in on like the emotional impact of who those villains are.
Sure.
And then you got to make it fun.
Excellent.
You know what's really fun, Josh?
What?
Killing children. Just lots of babies dead on the end of my lightsaber.
Oh, God. You're going back to the baby killing will again, are you?
Just every time.
Yeah.
How is Darth Vader fun?
Darth Vader is fun because Darth Vader is... okay. Let's differentiate, I guess, between like old Vader and new Vader. Old Vader is fun because he is like just like the epitome of like terror. Like he shows up in this horrifying outfit. You never see his face. He is as like inevitable as like the tide. Like he is coming. You're not slowing him down. You're not stopping him. He is going to win. He's going to take your hand in the process. And yeah, like he's just a guy who's just never known like real failure, you know? And part of what makes him fun too is that like his reputation precedes him, and you see like the fear from other people. Like, oh my God, Vader's coming. Oh fuck, we're fucked. Right?
There's a couple of moments in Empire that are like legitimately horror movie shots.
Yeah.
That I think are fun. Like especially when we're dealing with like the last fight in the Cloud City.
Yeah.
Where he's just like Luke is running and he's doing the slow walk.
Yeah.
Like it's just beat for beat a horror movie thing.
Yeah. He's straight up like Jason, right? Like
yeah.
So like you have this like checklist of what needs to be fun. So cool, unique powers. He fights Luke, and Luke thinks it's all about the laser swords, and then he starts throwing things through the air at him with his mind powers. And you're like, oh my God,
well, they established that early.
Option. Yeah.
Right? They established that early with the Force choking on, like, the...
Well, that's the
Star Destroyer or the... Yeah.
No, it's on the Rebel... The first one is, like, when he does it, like, to the guy on, like, the Rebel transport, where he just, like, picks him up off the ground with one hand, and you're like, holy fuck. And then he like chokes out one of his lieutenants. And you're like, oh, he can do some weird shit. Luke doesn't know that, right? Luke doesn't know that until he's fighting him on Cloud City. Then he's like, oh my God, why is he throwing a trash can at me from across the room? So he's got cool, unique powers. I mean, you saw him stop a laser bolt with his mind, right? Like, yeah, that's power. Weird personalities and or voices. Yeah, he's got weird voice in spades. Like his
best voice in the fucking game.
His personality is pretty muted, but it's like menacing and authoritative, and then filtered through like the original mask. You know,
I don't actually think that it is super muted either. Right? Like there's a few points where like Vader's personality really starts to like seep through in things. Like again, going back to the interaction that he has with Leia. Where like Leia is being a bit of a sarcastic ass.
Yeah.
And he's clearly gloating. Right? Like he won.
Yeah.
And he's proud of that.
Yeah.
And he wants to rub it in her face a little bit. And like there's no way that you're ever gonna beat me.
Yeah.
And I've got this on lock. Right. So there's definitely some personality in there, but it's like he's got all of this arrogance, and you can sense the arrogance, but it's underneath this veneer of control.
Right.
That is about to get obliterated any second.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, it's there's this, like, don't fuck with me attitude that he brings to, like, all of the interactions he has with underlings that's all just hidden behind a mask. And it's so much of it has to carry through his voice, right? Sense of humor or personality, like, obviously we talked about his personality here. Sense of humor, I don't know, he doesn't have a huge sense of humor, but, like, that's fine. I personally don't think, like, your villains need to be like humorous all the time, you know? Like there's
not all the time, but I do think that there is like the one line that I will give Vader is, "I've altered the deal. Pray that I don't alter it any further."
Yeah,
I think that's legitimately funny. Like, I
think it's unintentionally funny. I don't think that's like Vader's humor coming out. I think that's George's bad writing making for a funny line.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
I always took that to be like him just being a bit of a sassy bitch. Because like occasionally Vader is a sassy bitch.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like new Vader's more of a sassy bitch. But like OG
Vader is significantly sassier.
Yeah. OG Vader is very much a serious, like, fuck around and find out kind of guy who's just like, I am a singular will that is going to impose itself on the galaxy. And then when you see that, like, Vader actually serves someone else, that further establishes how potent of a threat that the Emperor is. If a creature like Vader bends the knee to the Emperor, that's some serious power, you know?
Yeah.
And a villain that is not physically imposing like Vader is. That's not an immediate threat to your life. You're like, oh, it's just some weird, frail man in a chair. And yet, Vader does not question him until, you know, obviously the penultimate scene, right? So...
interestingly, like, if we want to contrast that with Darth Maul.
Yeah.
Darth Maul doesn't really do anything that's unique.
Nothing unique. Absolutely nothing.
Force user.
He does... His only unique thing was a piece of equipment. He had a double-bladed lightsaber that he had a shitty flip over. That's it.
Yeah. Personality, he barely spoke.
He spoke
I actually think
once.
I think it would have been better if they had left Ray Park's voice in it.
Yeah.
Just because you're not expecting Ray Park's voice out of that face.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that would have, like, it wouldn't have been a lot of character, but it would have been just a hint.
Yeah.
Of, like, something a little more interesting. Like, one of the things that I'll give the sequel series is... I can't even remember his name because the series doesn't matter. The villain.
Kylo Ren?
His name. Yeah, Kylo Ren.
Adam
yeah, you're not expecting that guy to be a giant teenage tantrum baby.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's a giant teenage tantrum baby is actually kind of interesting.
Yeah. He's so not, like, Vader 2.0. He really wants to be, but he's not.
Yeah. So, like, having Darth Maul have, like, anything that was, like, a differentiating factor, like, Ray Park's voice is just a dude's voice.
Yeah, it's just, like,
it's a little higher in the register.
Yeah.
It's a guy. But, like, having just a slightly higher pitched voice instead of, like, the whatever, like, yes, my master, right? Like, just have him be a dude.
What's the one? It's like, soon we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi, and it's just like, oh, okay, whatever. It's the dumbest, like, and the line is so generic, and his voice is so whatever. It's just like,
yeah. And then he has no personality to speak of.
No, he didn't.
There are a couple of,
even with, like, the limited time that, like, Palpatine has, like, as the Emperor on screen, you get something. He's got an interesting clipped manner of speaking, and he's he's just a weird dude, but you don't get any of that out of Darth Maul. It's just like, I'm bad guy because I wear red.
I will give Ray Park some interesting physical acting for Maul.
But when do you see it? Like, only in the Duel of the Fates.
Only in that fight.
You see it.
Only in Duel of the Fates. Yeah. But, like, that's the only time that I think they really gave him any, like, room to play.
Oh yeah, he's got like actually kind of a bucket of personality in that fight, right?
Yeah,
like, without words, you see his, like, his swagger, his confidence, his, you know, come at me kind of bitch demeanor. Like, they get a lot
like
of
a predator.
That. Yeah.
Right, like he moves like a large cat.
Yeah,
that is playing with his prey.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Right? Like, it's the only chance that he has, but it's the only, like, that is the only bit of personality that we really get.
Yeah, because you see him for a grand total of 12 seconds the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
But...
And then the last note that I have under fun is camp.
Yeah. That I will give, like, in that Duel of the Fates scene, like, there's plenty of camp in Darth Maul.
Oh, yes.
There's not a lot of campiness in, like, OG Vader.
No, not really.
It's played very straight.
When I was writing that, I didn't... We've structured this around Star Wars, like, after the notes were written.
Yeah.
We didn't, like, have any notes about Star Wars before we started this. But, like, the character that I was thinking of when I wrote the line about the camp was actually Von Laserstein.
Oh yeah.
Right. Just like a big bombastic personality wearing a hand as a necklace, playing guitar, being like very over the top. And I imagined as I was putting that character together that he was going to be too campy.
Right.
Right. That nobody was going to take that like villain seriously. And then everybody did.
Yeah, it wound up being kind of the perfect amount of camp. I definitely have a lot more camp in my D&D villains, you know? Because, like I've said before, it's cartoonish levels of villainy that I like playing with.
Well, and you have to... the amount of camp that you have to communicate for it to come across as campy in D&D, right? Like, just because of the medium itself is already kind of campy.
Yeah.
The amount of camp that you need to make a villain campy is significantly higher than you might think it is.
Right.
Like, unless you are going like drag queen levels of campy, and even then, I can think of like some drag queen level villains that I've put together that are like still taken very seriously.
Yeah.
Because overacting and over presenting and over emoting, all of that works in the improv that you're doing for role-playing games in a way that it wouldn't translate if you were on a screen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something about like I think it's weirdly something about the intimacy of the medium and the confined spaces that makes the over-the-top like portrayals actually like work up close and personal in a way that they don't from a distance.
Yeah, I think so too. And also just like it is providing some permission to your players that they can be campy too, which I think sometimes takes a bit of a load off from people who are worried that they're going to come off as corny.
Yeah. If you're establishing the stakes as corny, then they can be corny and it's not going to seem out of place.
Yeah.
And it's easy. I think it's easier to improvise as a corny cartoon, you know?
It can be, yeah. It really depends on the emotional beat that you're going for. But, like, even then, I've found that, like, if you go for a serious emotional beat with a character that's established as being pretty corny already, because of the switch in tone, it sells really well.
Yeah. It definitely, like, locks in their attention. Because it's that like shock to the senses almost is like, oh, this is new.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're over time, but like I still want to go through some of these random tips because I think some of them are actually pretty dope.
Yeah, definitely.
So I just have like a list of things that I'm going to run through. Number 1, figure out goals ahead of time.
Yes.
You want to know why your villains are attempting to do a thing and how they're going to accomplish it.
Yeah.
A lot of times for villains, the what they're doing is a lot less important than why they're doing it. Mm-hmm. Insofar as like being able to improvise new scenarios as your players are interacting with them.
Yeah, I mean, they make this a lot easier in like the pre-con stuff where they kind of give you like an overall objective of what's happening in the story, but like, yeah, try to think bigger picture of like, if this guy worships Orcus, what is he actually trying to accomplish? Does he want to bring Orcus back? Right. Or does he just want to like, and maybe it's something, his actual objective is smaller and more personal, you know?
Well, I've actually found that the published modules don't do a very good job of getting high level with it.
Sure.
Like most of the time when I'm looking at motivations in those, they're still fairly focused in on the exact scenario that you're working with.
Right.
Just broaden it out a little bit, right? Like get a little more personal with it, figure out what it is that they personally are trying to do, because that's going to inform a lot of their decision making.
Yeah, definitely.
Steal characters.
Yeah. Oh, so much. Yeah. Steal every character.
All the time, forever. Yeah. Every single character. There's a separate section here that I have for like taking heroes and turning them into villains.
Oh, yeah.
Who would be your number one hero to turn into a villain in a D&D campaign? If you had to steal somebody.
The Punisher.
Good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has, like, going back to some of the tropes we talked about earlier, but he has, like, a morality and an objective and a, like, overall drive and methodology that,
right,
makes sense to him, but puts him, strictly speaking, at odds with, law-abiding characters or good people.
One of the examples that I put here was the Doctor from Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Just like a time-traveling wizard in a time machine that knows everything.
Yeah.
And is like 1,000 years old. Not somebody that I would necessarily want to go up against in a lot of cases.
Nope.
And like the potential for storytelling across multiple timelines is interesting there.
Well, and that's something that I think is just, like, underexplored in that, like, universe anyways. It's like, these guys are time lords. How do they get to be the lords of time? It's not just by hanging around.
Yeah.
And so extrapolating that into your game as a character is super cool. One that popped into my head that might be fun is the Saitama from One Punch Man.
Oh, yeah.
A guy who's phenomenally powerful, but just, like, bored and lacking, like, direction in life.
And, like, Saitama's version of that is the most heroic idea for how you could go about being bored like that, but the opportunities for just being like, fuck it, I'm gonna do what I want.
Yeah.
Right? I can punch the world in half. Who's gonna stop me?
Yeah, exactly.
You guys. I'm a Tarrasque, but I'm human-sized.
Yeah, and just making him, like, kind of a goofball sounds really fun to me.
Yeah, just like a natural disaster of a person. Which actually leads me to Vash the Stampede from Trigun.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
Just like a guy who shows up. He isn't necessarily meaning to be evil.
Yeah.
But, like, evil stuff just keeps happening around him.
Yep.
Would be a lot of fun. And then, like, I've just got, like, a quick, like, lightning round of, like, Mario. Would be fun as a bad guy. Goku.
Yeah.
From Dragon Ball. Aang from Avatar The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
Did you watch Legend of Korra?
I've watched 2 seasons, maybe. I saw, like, the blood bending and maybe some other stuff, but I definitely didn't finish all of it. I didn't get to the Korra is gay ending.
Okay. There's evil airbenders.
Oh, okay.
Later on in the series, and it is a little bit horrifying what airbenders can do. Yeah.
Just that whole world, like, the abstract concept of, like, what if I had total control over something like that is wild.
Fuck, I had so many ideas for how great Amon could have been as, like, a longer term villain. Like, I'm a little bit annoyed at the twist for Amon being a bloodbender. I wanted him to actually be a non-bender.
Yeah.
Right? Like, give me somebody who is actually addressing some of the, like, sociological problems of having a class of people who can make lightning from their fingers and a class of people who can't do anything.
Yeah. Well, right, and I think that's something that, like, the Legend of Korra sort of explores as a whole that I think is really interesting is, like, in the OG series, everyone, like, has, like, these, like, self-imposed restrictions on their bending and the way that it operates in the world. And then Korra is like, hey, all those weird ideas you had about what would you actually do if you actually control these things on the elemental level, they just, like, pulled all of the restraints off and are like, yeah, let's look at that. Mm-hmm. What does it mean when you can control the iron in someone's blood or whatever, right? Like,
yeah, fucking dope.
Yeah.
That I'm a little sad that the like there were some production problems with the series that wrecked some of the storylines, and, like, one of their animation studios wasn't able to work with them for, like, the middle part of one of their seasons, and definitely saw a dip in quality because of it. But I liked a lot of the ideas that they brought forward, and the idea of like non-benders joining together to deal with the inequality of bending as a sociological thing was just fucking great.
Yeah, like what if a portion of your society are borderline gods, and well, it's the X-Men question again. Like,
right?
How do we coexist with people who can just like wipe us off the face of the planet if they decide to?
Yeah, I have a great idea for like a third season, like a third series of Avatar that we aren't going to talk about here, but we should definitely talk about at some point.
Oh, definitely.
Evil Spider-Man, not Venom,
right?
But like actually Spider-Man being evil.
Yeah,
would be fucking crazy.
Yeah,
just like street level villain with nearly godlike power. Of just like, because the thing with Spider-Man is he's way stronger than he has to be. He's faster than he has to be. He dodges bullets. He is incredibly overpowered for the role that he fits in the Marvel Universe. Because he's just like dealing with robbers and muggers and stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's a guy that could punch Thanos in the face and break his jaw.
Right. But it's also, all of that is contained inside of the body of a 17-year-old who doesn't really know what's going on.
And who's been pulling his punches the entire time he's been a hero.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like he's playing patty cake. So like you set that guy loose.
Yeah.
As a villain, fucking dope.
Yeah.
King Arthur.
I love
J.K.
the idea
Rowling.
of like,
wait.
No, I love the idea of like Arthur and his court of knights, like with all of their weird superpowers or whatever, like having to deal with, you know, what's his name? Lancelot and stuff like that. Like, I think that'd be neat.
Yeah. I'm a huge Arthurian fantasy nerd. And the idea of revisiting that with a bit more of like a dictatorial flair.
Yeah.
Is interesting to me. Have you seen The Green Knight?
No, I haven't.
Fucking watch The Green Knight.
Okay.
It's so good.
I've seen it on there, and I think they put it on a wish list a year ago, and I just didn't get around to it.
It's so good.
Okay, deal.
And then I have a thing about like introductions. So Darth Vader's introduction is fucking great. I think the only time they've outdone it was the end of Rogue One.
Yeah, but that was just redoing the same awesome introduction again, right?
Yes. And making him good at lightsabers this time.
Yes. Yeah, just doubled down on an already excellent introduction. And
again, talking about the voice, the fact that like that like is like so iconic.
Yeah.
That like have you read that thing about how like Anakin is such a dramatic bitch that he turned off his respirator so that he couldn't breathe, so that he was able to like get the drama of turning on his fucking lightsaber.
He like held his breath for a minute just so they could.
So good.
I love over the top campy Anakin, just like, oh, this is gonna fuck with him.
Yeah. And then my last of the random tips is that sometimes it's good to make somebody a villain just because your players don't trust them.
Yeah. Yeah.
There've been a lot of occasions. Yeah. Like, I think every DM has been in that place where you introduce a nobody, like just some random fucking character, and your characters, like your players, glomp onto him as this, like, some sort of conspiracy, or they absolutely love this person despite the fact that they're a cardboard cutout, or they absolutely hate this person and they're sure that they're a villain and they keep coming back to like some conspiracy about this person, and you're like, no, he's just a baker, guys. He just bakes bread.
Well, that's the thing. You hear all the time about like people doing like the good version of that, where it's like, oh, they just human beings pair bonded to this goblin. Boblin the goblin is now the pet for the whole party.
Yeah.
Well, do the opposite. Like your party just for whatever 100%. Reason just didn't like the local potion merchant, and by villainizing him, actually turned him into a villain.
I'm vaguely mistrustful of the mayor, and now the mayor is your fucking big bad.
Yeah, and he is literally just like a mid-level bureaucrat. It's just like, I don't understand. Like, I just process taxes.
I think there's a pretty good case to be made for politicians just being evil in general.
Okay, well, that's a whole other episode.
So we're going to kill that one.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for making it all the way through this episode of No Plot, Only Lore. If you're looking for more, you can always find us at noplotonlylore.com and on all the very best podcast platforms. If you like what you heard today, please share, rate, and review the show to feed my never-ending need for attention and validation.